The SEC once again loaded 7 ranked teams, including 4 inside the top 10. Alabama looking to get back into the college football playoff after missing out for the first time last season. Georgia, the first team out in each of the last 2 seasons. Reigning national champ LSU, just 5 returning starters. That is the least of any Power 5 school. Look, we're used to seeing college football schedules crafted years and years in advance. Certainly not the case here in 2020. It's more of a bit of a scheduling on the fly type approach. And it's that scheduling, Coach, that gives you some pause when you're assessing the SEC big term this season.
The storyline of 2020 is going to be the scheduling, really the inequity of scheduling. It's unprecedented issues that the coaches are going to deal with. And as I've been studying the last 3 weeks, as all coaches across the country stare at their schedules, and say, okay, now wait a minute, where are the speed bumps? And number one is, who do you play? How many ranked teams? So this is a criteria that I use on the most difficult schedules. Who do you play? How many ranked teams? Number 2 is, where do you play those ranked teams? And the number 3, which might be the most important, you're going to see in a second, is where do you play them? So let's take a look. So you have the ACC, and Clemson, obviously the big dog of the ACC. There are going to be probably at least 3 touchdown favorites in every game except for the big one at Notre Dame.
That's right. Upset, Coach. Upset on that one.
No. They played 10 conference games, 2 bye weeks. That's very important. Then you go down to the Big 12. The Big 12 only has 9 conference games. That's significant. But even more significant, they have 3 bye weeks to keep their players healthy. You're going to have 3 potential speed bumps for Oklahoma. At Iowa State, always a very difficult game. The Red River Shootout against Texas, and then Bedlam later. But that's spaced out, and once again, 3 bye weeks. Now let's take a look at the SEC. I believe arguably the most difficult schedules in college football history. But here's where spacing, remember the when. When do you play them? Alabama plays 5 ranked teams. However, they're spaced out. You can get your players healthy between the big games. They open up against Missouri, heavily favored, right to A&M at home in a big game. Heavily favored against Ole Miss. Number 4, Georgia. Heavily ranked favorites over Tennessee, Mississippi State, and then a big one at LSU, Kentucky, the Iron Bowl, then Arkansas. The point is, notice they're spaced out. Here's the most difficult schedule that I've witnessed, and this is LSU. They're going to go the 3 games. They start the season. They'll be heavily favored. Then they go to Florida, big game. South Carolina, Auburn, Alabama, back-to-back. They do have bye week between it. At Arkansas, then a big, huge game against A&M, and then close with Ole Miss. Here's what I want you to look at. Within a 6-week period, you're playing 4 teams in the top 15 in America. You have the ACC. They have 3 ranked teams. That's it. Clemson plays, think about this. Clemson plays 1 ranked team. They'll be a 3-touchdown favorite. If they stay healthy, they're going. So, Brady, there's a big inequity in scheduling. How will the college football playoff people look at this? That remains to be seen. I believe November is going to be a street fight for the SEC, survival of the fittest.
I was just going to say, it's all about survival. Yep. Hopefully they can move on. The interesting thing is, with these rankings right now, we have teams that are ranked within the Big Ten, Pac-12 that aren't necessarily playing, at least not as of right now. And so even with some losses, you're probably still going to see some SEC teams still ranked just because of that if the Pac-12 and Big Ten don't come back. It's going to be interesting to watch that. And the other thing is, you talked about only 1 bye week as opposed to the Big 12, which has 3. Not as much flexibility for any issues with COVID, which we've already seen have been a problem so far. So I am curious to see how COVID will play an impact on that, in particular the SEC schedule, and if they have to delay or move things back, or how that would end up faring out with how the College Football Playoff Committee would look at them.
Yeah, that is a brutal schedule. I do look at the SEC, and I think, first of all, I think this could play into their favor based on what the committee and their criteria. I'm going to get to that in a second. But when you look at the top teams in the SEC, Coach, we hit this all off season and on our shows. Really, the teams that have a great quarterback or an experienced quarterback coming back, with the exception to LSU, all of those top teams have guys there that hopefully can kind of navigate through the challenges of an SEC schedule. But Brady, to your point, when you look at the committee, right, they value the 4 best teams, the best conference, the strength of schedule. Well, Coach, we just saw it right there. The strength of schedule lies in the SEC. Right. So that's why I think at the end of the year, you could see 2, maybe even 3 SEC teams, not only because of strength of schedule, but because the big pool of teams, there's 54 teams not playing from the FBS.
And maybe even a 2-loss team makes it in for the first time like we haven't seen before, Reggie.
So, Matt, it sounds like you're saying that you don't really see this schedule as a disadvantage Because
I think it's a disadvantage because of the health reasons. Like, this is a gauntlet physically. But every team, I mean, it's football. Every team, you got. I mean, Clemson, even though they have an easier schedule, you still have to remain healthy. So
that's where I would only push back, is because, to me, I want to see the SEC play the SEC, right? I don't want to see Alabama favored by 50 points against an FCS school, right? We talked about it last year to end the season. Ohio State's playing Penn State. Alabama's playing Coastal Carolina, right? And so when you think about the SEC, and as it stands, it claims to be the toughest conference. Well, yeah, you can claim to be the toughest conference, but you can't also say, well, we don't want to play as many conference games as everybody else, because, again, I want to see the big boys play the big boys. You don't see the NFL playing Canadian Football League, for a game or two, right? Like, you just don't do it. It doesn't happen. So why are we so accepting of that in college football?
More uniformy amongst all.
I'm in favor for conference.
9 conference games. Yeah.
You're not playing it or coaching it. What the hell are we talking about? So SEC, their schedule philosophy has always been get to the national championship. Yep. I sat in those conferences, in those meetings for 6 years. That's why you saw the Chattanooga, the Citadel, some team that really shouldn't be there playing against an Alabama or Florida. Why? As a coach and as a player, I would come in every Sunday. You walk through the training room and you'd see 35 guys in here and say, oh, now we got to get ready for Tuesday practice. I'd walk right in the training room and say, are we going to have, especially the linemen, are we going to have them for practice because we're facing a 3-4, stunt 3-4, whatever.
Right.
They're going to say, Coach, you won't have until Thursday. And you're like, my gosh. Yeah. That goes week after week, and then you stare at your schedule and say, when is that soft game coming? We need that soft game. Mm-hmm. Look at that thing. I went back to 06 real quick. 06, we won the national title, had the most difficult schedule in America. We called it the gauntlet. That was the Tennessee, Georgia, Alabama, Auburn, LSU, bang, 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 right in a row. This is even more difficult than the season week, because back then Alabama wasn't the Alabama it is now.
Right. What were you telling us yesterday? You would schedule a dog, a medium dog, and a big dog?
And one big dog, one medium dog, and one small dog.
Yeah, there's not a lot of small dogs running around the SEC schedule this year.
For non-conference.
Let's get our good friend Joel Klatt involved in this conversation, because he's got something to say. Joel, standing by for our Big Noon Saturday call in Manhattan with our good friend Gus Johnson. Let me start with this. What level of a disadvantage, Joel, do you see the SEC at right now?
Great question. Love the discussion, but let me start by saying, with all due respect, none of us who were outside of the SEC for our entire careers or lives are crying in our Cheerios for the SEC this year, right? It's kind of like, hey, welcome to the party. You don't have to play Citadel in November anymore. And just to give you some sense of reference here, if you go back, ever since Nick Saban won his first national championship at Alabama, really what you see in Alabama's schedule is they would never play more than about 3 Power 5 opponents on consecutive weeks. Now that's going to be obviously very different, and no one's crying for Alabama because they've had that type of a road now for a little bit over a decade. And then the other point I would bring up, guys, is the fact that the other conference, this is not going to be different for them. Right, for the Big 12, you could argue that this is an easier type of a year because they don't have the non-league games and then their league schedule. So this is the same old party for the Big 12, similar in the ACC. Plus, in the ACC, Clemson is so far above everybody else in that conference, even Notre Dame. Sorry, Brady. Last year, North Carolina was the only team to play within a score of Clemson. Clemson beat every other league opponent by over 31 points. So they're not going to be worried about their conference-only schedule. Now the SEC is going to have to go through this gauntlet, and it's certainly the most difficult schedules I've ever seen in college football, but nobody's crying in their Cheerios for the SEC. And let's be honest, we don't know how the playoff committee is going to absolutely rate these teams at the end of the year, because the criteria is still the 4 best. There could be a 3-loss SEC team that they think, well, you know what, that's still one of the 4 best teams in America at this point, in particular with only 3 conferences playing. So lots going to play out as a disadvantage, though, Rob. To answer your initial question, I don't see it as a disadvantage at all. I actually think of it as a benefit for college football fans, because we get to see the best matchups in the SEC, which we've all wanted to see for years.
Big Noon Kickoff, Saturdays at 11 Eastern on Fox and the Fox Sports app.
Hey, thanks for watching. If you enjoy that clip, make sure you click subscribe somewhere down here. From game highlights to exclusive interviews and rankings, we've got everything you need as a college football fan right here. College Football on Fox.